So for today's session is a follow-up from last Tuesday's session, the lecture itself on adult surveillance. And in particular today, you will learn some of the different traps that are used for catching Aedes mosquitoes. So just to recap, this is the overview of the different traps that we briefly covered on Tuesday, where we talk about using OV traps to collect eggs, doing larvae and pupae survey for your immature surveillance to really understand what are the key breeding habitats of these Aedes mosquitoes in particular. And for the adults, there is a whole suite of methods that can be used to capture them. So in this particular session, it's really for the participants to really learn the concept, the strengths, and the limitations of some of these selected adult traps that are highlighted in bold. So in particular, I'll be focusing on the hole-seeking trap as well as the ovid position trap that we'll touch on, and some of the considerations for a monitoring program, because I think previously there was quite a bit of questions as to how to start a program. So there'll be something that we covered here. So let me start off with those adult traps that target hole-seeking female mosquitoes. So I always like to bring this example or this classical trap to everyone's attention because it is the first trap that was actually developed and invented to design to catch Aedes aegypti mosquitoes. And what's interesting is that in this particular trap itself, it utilizes visual cues. If you notice, there's this black and white panels. So this contrasting black and white panels is attractive to Aedes aegypti from a distance, and this contrasting color is what attracts them to the trap. And of course, once they fly towards the trap, there is a suction fan that draws the mosquito into the collection device at the bottom of it. So in a way, this black and white contrasting panel has been used in quite a fair bit of traps nowadays, especially the PG Sentinel trap that we'll briefly touch on later on. But of course, I believe many of you would not have heard of or seen this trap anymore because it's really heavy and cumbersome. It requires a power supply and typically it can damage specimen as well. Okay, for those of you who, the picture is not very clear, you can refer to the references that I have listed below, or you can refer to the presentation material that is uploaded on OneDrive as well. So that will be clearer for you. Of course, moving on, nowadays, I think a lot of us are familiar with the PG Sentinel trap that has been developed probably about a decade already. And really it targets what we call hole-seeking female Aedes mosquito. But essentially it does capture other mosquitoes as well because it really depends on how long you put this trap out in the environment. So as we have seen earlier from the Fay Prince trap, utilizing the contrasting black and white coloration that you can see over here as well, what Biogens, the inventor that did it, is that they have included the lure itself. So over here, they use olfactory lure. That means lure that will be attractive to the Aedes mosquito from a distance. And in particular, this lure will contain very common volatile materials from our typical human sweat, like ammonia, lactic acid, and even carboxylic acid, and so on. And if you want to make it more attractive to not just Aedes mosquito, but other mosquitoes, you can actually add carbon dioxide to the trap itself. So what's nice about this trap is it's actually very collapsible. As you can see in the image here, you can, collapse the entire trap and put it in the bag and just carry it along. And once you reach a particular location, you can deploy the full trap. It's a spring inside and it will just be bounced up, and so that you have a full trap that is ready for collection purpose. And how it works is that when you have the lure at the side or at the top of it, there is a suction fan that is below the trap over here. What it does is as mosquito comes towards this trap, they are sucked into the suction fan and through a collection bag at the bottom. And because of the suction fan itself, it's a convection current and it actually pushes the lure out to the environment. So this is how the trap acts as both pushing the lure out as well as sucking the mosquitoes into the trap itself. And of course, what's happening nowadays, I mean, recently is that the BG has also developed what they call remote sensing, where you can add this count, what they call BG counter, onto the trap itself. Now that you have briefly heard about this trap, I mean, in your chat itself, would you like to share what are you think will be some of the limitations? I mean, just use the chat, or if you like to, you can just shout out as well.
So I think Dr. Chong, if you could
Yes.
please repeat the question, maybe. So because some of them they said there's an interruption in sound.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering what are the participants taught as to what are the limitations or disadvantage of this particular trap? You can use the chat to type in your answer if you like. Yeah, that's participants say damage in some parts. Yes, I mean that is something that is quite common in a lot of these suction fan devices. So that is one. Children may play with it. Yes, it depends on where you put them. Yes, because it's something very new and not just children, to be frank. I mean, no experience. We even have adults who will meddle with it as well. So yeah, not just children. Okay. Damaged specimens may be expensive, not correctly equipped. Yeah, yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah, trap other insects, not just mosquitoes. So definitely you need, I would say, trained personnel to be able to sort the insects from other mosquitoes. I mean, yeah, mosquitoes from other insects. Okay, very nice. It's smelly. Yeah. So the thing about the BG lure is that because it mimics the smell of the human host, what happens is that from if you're close to the trap itself, the lure can be actually quite strong. Yeah. So it depends on factory system of insects and so on. Yeah. Okay, let me just briefly just show you some of the answers. One thing to note is that it requires a power supply. I mean, to operate the suction fan, you definitely need a power supply. So it can be in the form of a 12-volt battery, like a car battery, for instance. Or you could actually, connect it to a more stable power supply if you can. If for BG trap, which I will discuss later, you are in a lot of the outdoor environments where you do not have the luxury of power. So sometimes you can actually use power solar panel and so on. Damaged specimen is expensive. For those of you who have been to the BG web page itself, it at the moment I think it's cost about 150 to 200 euro. So it's not cheap, and depending on where you place them, it may require certain space to be deployed in the. So I've actually extracted some information that is provided by the manufacturer onto how you position the trap and where you position the trap. In particular, when it comes to traps itself, the key consideration of wind, rainfall, and sun is something that applies to almost all traps itself, especially for traps that are, I mean, for biting mosquitoes in particular. We like to put them under shelter, shade, and so on, so that it's more conducive and rainfall can actually damage the trap itself, and not just that, it will also damage the specimens that are in the trapping surveillance system itself. We tend to avoid rainy season if we can, or we would choose to deploy them in very sheltered environment. As you can see in this, image on the right itself, there's actually a shelter, I mean a cover on top of the trap, really to prevent the specimens from being damaged. So one thing to note as well is that for the trap itself, you need a certain clearance above the trap, and it's recommended that there should be at least 5 meter, and this will apply to some traps that we'll discuss later on as well. So these are some of the typical placement where you put it under shade of trees or with shelter and so on. Really is to avoid it being very dense bushes and to ensure that it's sheltered. The next trap is the CDC light trap. While it is not designed for catching Aedes mosquito, you can actually, it's really designed to capture hole-seeking nocturnal female mosquitoes. And in this case, it utilizes light itself, and you can have the option of adding carbon dioxide to the trap. Very similar concept of using the fan to actually suck the mosquitoes into the trap. And because it's deployed at night, that's where you can capture mosquitoes like Culex and Anopheles to the trap itself. Of course, the limitation, as you can see here, is very similar to any traps that has the power supply to it, the G trap as well, and so on. Because suction tends to damage the specimen to a certain extent, so that's something to note as well. One thing to know is that because the trap is deployed overnight, you will not be able to know when is the peak activity period of the particular species that is of interest to you. And another thing to note is that because the trap needs to be hung at least 1.5 meter above the ground, you need to look for a structure to hang the trap itself. What we did, in-house is that we have actually developed what we call the night catcher. So something that's developed in-house to target any female hole-seeking mosquitoes. It's really a modification of the CDC light trap where we incorporated a turning disc, lag mosquitoes based on the fixed situation that we lag onto. And because we arm it with a physical structure, there's no need to hang this trap anymore. Let me just quickly show you a video. Again, the video is also uploaded into OneDrive. If it's for you. How you attach the suction device to the trap itself. Of course, subsequently is the connection of the different cables to the trap itself. Okay, hi. Yeah, I saw some of your feedbacks over here that the video is not very clear. So, if you need to, try the video will be uploaded into OneDrive, and you can actually view the trap there. So, yes, I've seen some comments over here as well that it cannot be used in open. In fact, we use it in some of the forests and so on, so it can be used. Let me just stress again that this is actually a modified CDC light trap. It's just that we have incorporated a base to it as well as the rotating disc for hourly collections or a fixed period of time for so that we know the activity time of the uh, mosquito itself. Could be for Anopheles, could be for Culex as well. Okay. Okay. Now let me. I hope you can hear me well. So now let me focus on the adult traps that target the gravid female mosquitoes that we have previously shared. So I think you probably understand a bit of how this works already. So just to remind that, just to recap that it targets gravid females. In fact, female looking for a place to lay. So you can see over here that this female Aedes albopictus is actually stuck on the sticky lining. So we often get asked this question. So what is the material of this sticky lining? In fact, this is something that I think many countries would already have them. We use actually the rodent glue, the sticky glue board itself, for for the sticky lining itself. So really very simple. Just have water and you have a sticky lining inside. And when this gravid mosquito comes to the trap, that's where they get stuck. And this is in particular designed for container breeders. And container breeders could be your Aedes albopictus, Aedes aegypti, and so on. And when it comes to some other container breeders like Anopheles stephensi, we're not sure. But if countries are keen to explore this further, it's something that they can really look into it. So there are some questions, some comments in the chat about the use of sticky traps for sandfly collection. I'm not familiar with that. Perhaps the participant can share more as to how they can use this for sandfly collection. Okay, we'll talk about some of the selection later on again. Let me just continue to focus on this sticky trap itself. So again, I'll show you the video. It will also be uploaded in OneDrive. So if it's not clear and choppy to you, you may refer to the copy on OneDrive as well. So this is just to show you how you prepare the hay infusion and where the traps are deployed and how you collect the mosquito itself. Okay, let me pause here. Is there any question about the use of sticky traps? I mean, I see some comments about the use of a sticky PV trap or even sticky oil trap in sandfly. I mean, for sandfly surveillance. And perhaps just to note that sticky trap, while it's useful, it may damage specimen as well. So if you need very intact samples, it may not be as ideal sometimes. Yeah. Yes, I heard. Yeah, I know that Sudan is using gravity trap, and it's really good to hear that more countries are actually adopting the use of sticky traps for surveillance purpose. Let me just move. In fact, sticky trap is not something unique to Singapore, and in fact, many countries have their own version of it. Like Brazil has the mosquito trap, very similar setup as well, using water as well as a sticky lining inside. And BG Get, the same company that makes the BG Sentinel trap, has also developed this what they call the gravity Aedes trap. It's very interesting because they started off as a lethal trap where within the device itself, they initially started off with just spraying insecticide, but now they have decided to use the sticky paper instead. And of course, Malaysia and Thailand have their own version as well. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So one nice thing about the use of sticky trap is it's very simple. Just add water or hay infusion, you call it, and then you could just deploy the trap. Simple to use and easy itself. Very easy. Of course, everything simple tends to have its own some limitation as well. And I presume that in terms of some of the countries that have used the sticky trap would have faced very similar challenges as well, where it can be pretty intensive when it comes to monitoring a trap because you need to go back and collect the samples and so on. And often we do find that because the trap is relatively small, it can be empty or overturned by mistake or intentionally because often we do have community or our residents who think that there is a device that is breeding mosquito outside the home. So it takes a bit of education to tell them that okay, this is for surveillance and for control purpose, and that's where they will leave it alone. And because it's sticky, as some of the countries have mentioned, that this is also used for other insects collection. Yes, it does collect other insects as well, and associated with the insects is where you have lizards that comes looking for food as well. So that can also make it a challenge for the maintenance itself. And as you can see in some of the pictures here, in some of the feedbacks that we have as well, where we have people using as ashtray or even as a flower pot and so on. So these are some of the challenges that we face. For Sudan, do you face similar challenges as well?
Hello, may I answer? Actually, the main problem that we face is the sand. The place that we use it was very sandy, and the wind affects the sticky liner with this small amount of dust, so it may reduce its capacity to capture the mosquitoes. Well,
So sorry, can you repeat again?
So in Sudan, it's actually still as a pilot, and he's saying that it's in a friendly environment. There are not many challenges in this area that they're trying out the gravity traps.
That's great to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really depends on different locations and some of the because different places will have their unique challenges, I would say.
Yeah, so it's still being tested as a pilot first. It hasn't been deployed as a surveillance tool widely.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed.
So of course, moving on from the sticky trap, just to share some other innovation that we have shared with other participants in the past is the use of just a netting in front of a fan. And we have used this for our some of our research study and even surveillance itself. And we find that this is a very interesting project where you can involve the community to be part of a surveillance plan itself. So as you can see in the image here, you just need to attach a fan with very fine mesh right in front of the fan, and it will passively capture any insects that is very close within the homes or close to the trap itself. And we have compared the fan trap, this fan netting trap, with let's say a BG trap without lure, and you find that it's actually comparable when it comes to capturing of mosquitoes in homes. So something that countries might even want to consider, that to manufacture some of this fine mesh netting and do some capturing and potentially involve the community to be part of the very quick monitoring or surveillance program itself. Yeah, just back to the chat here. Yeah, so it's mentioned that one of the major problems faced is the accumulation of dust in the sticky lining. And yes, that's something that we do face, and it really depends on how dusty a particular location is. So for us, our experience is that we need to change our lining maybe once or twice a month. It depends, but there are some locations where we may even have to change on a weekly basis. So we need to monitor, and it would have to be the case-to-case basis as well. And if you noticed earlier during the video, what we did was we actually added a cover above the trap. And we noticed that with the cover, it does help to reduce the dust accumulation. So that's something that you may want to consider, just adding a cover with a hole above so that it allows the mosquitoes to still go into the trap itself. Something to explore and see whether that helps to reduce the accumulation of dust on the lining. Okay, there's quite a bit of okay, yeah. Thanks for the good capturing rate. Not to, okay, can. Okay, now there's a bit of question about how many traps do you use in the environment and so on. So just to have one slide to touch on this about trap density. Very simple. In fact, I've taken this from a pretty recent WHO document that talks about some of the recommendation as to how you can do some efficacy testing of traps for control of Aedes species mosquito vectors. So I think a lot of times the question will be, how many traps for efficient deployment? Sometimes it's, because it's very much dependent on the mosquito and trap contact time, which is also dependent on the local mosquito population itself, the habitat, and whether there are other competing, larvae habitats and so on. And clearly, while the more traps could potentially provide slightly more information, it also means that you need to increase your cost of trapping, which may not be ideal. And clearly, if you can reduce the number of traps out there, you will reduce quite a bit of resources and, of course, the cost itself. So in this very simple image here on the left, what we call panel A, you can see that in the area itself, you can start off with one trap, and you can add 2 traps, 3 traps, or even 4 traps. Essentially what you want is to, as your trap increase in the area, you can see that the number of mosquitoes that you capture across time will actually plateau. And in this very simple example, it's telling us that, by the time you have 3 traps in this area, you have captured most of the information that you need, because having 4 traps or even 5 traps and more does not add additional information to your surveillance itself. So really, I mean, you will need to start a very small scale field study to really determine the proposed trap density to know whether it's sufficient or not. And that's sometimes also very dependent on the logistic as well. Yeah, some comments about using our LL, fabrics, and you can consider all these ideas as well. And I think it's good that all the participants are sharing some of these thoughts as well. Do we have any questions on trap density? Okay, there's a question here. What would be the outcome of fan-based trap? Mechanical sweeping or light traps can trap more mosquitoes and save more time. So I think it really depends on the location and context, and often you may have to deploy a few different traps to see which is the one that's most suited in your environment. The fan-based trap is something that, in my opinion, is something very easy for a lot of communities to start working with, and because you probably need to procure other traps as well. But if you have a chance to really test out these few traps in a village or a community, try a few and see which one is the best for that particular location itself. Yes, there's a question for PG trap. Abdullah Awash. Yeah, if I pronounce it correctly. I mean, please share your question with us. Okay, let me go to the other question. What's the appropriate distance between traps to? Yep, sorry, please talking.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sheikh. I share my question verbally. Hello?
Hello, yes, we hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your nice presentation. My question is regarding to the BG traps. When you use lure within CO2, did you notice that the density of Aedes it's increased significantly with CO2 or not? Because we use it, this is previously without CO2, just lure. Thank you.
May I suggest, may I suggest that any questions should be typed in the chat box? Because sometimes it's even not clear to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, about the question about the use of BG traps, I mean, whether the use of CO2 will increase the attractiveness of mosquitoes in addition to the lure itself. I mean, personally, we have some experience. It does increase. And if you look at some of the publications out there, it shows that it can increase catch quite dramatically. But I think really the question is really what you want to get out from this trapping itself. Do you want to understand what's whether there's presence of vector, or are you trying to assess the population size and so on? So there are some things to really ask first before I mean you can really say whether it's better or not. For surveillance purpose by itself, the lure is good enough. Addition of carbon dioxide will just increase your catch for Aedes. But of course, if you want to use it for other night biting mosquitoes, nocturnal mosquitoes at night, the use of CO2 will definitely be useful. For instance, Anopheles and Culex, which may not be as attracted to the BG lure. Should notice lure with CO2. Oh yeah. So I hope that answers the question. So there is, let me see, okay. There's a question of what is the appropriate distance between traps to be placed in view conditions. So again, this trap distance question is a bit like what I'm sharing here, the trap density
Dr.
as well.
Chong, sorry, your voice is not that clear. Is it? It's sometimes breaking.
Is it a connection issue? I mean,
it looks like a technical issue.
yeah, okay. Yeah. So regarding the question on appropriate distance between traps, so it'll be back to this trap question of this trap density that I presented here on the screen itself. So you will need to place them in different configurations to see what. So there is no hard and fast rule as to what is the appropriate distance. It's really dependent on the condition of the patient itself. So graviton is more sensitive than OV traps. They are used for different purpose itself, but I think what is the advantage of trap is capture the female directly rather than letting her fly away. So it's a bit different because Aedes in particular, they have this skip OV position behavior. So one females could potentially, one females, I mean, instance, 100 eggs, she would probably lay 20 eggs in OV trap 1. Rest of it doesn't mean that you have 3 out there, but you have the sticky that directly captures the way that you have captured. In a sense, quite different kind of in terms of the population itself. Okay. And there's a lot of questions. So we will move on to the second export itself. I didn't manage to, recapture them. Probably participants may need to retype some of the questions that I failed to answer earlier. So yeah, hope this will let's just continue and we will have some of the questions later on. Again, really sorry for this choppiness earlier. And now let me touch on the considerations for a surveillance program. And I think this is something that is very of importance to a lot of interest and importance to a lot of you here. So just to share with some of the key points that I have here. So we'll just touch on them slowly. I think one of the key considerations for is to really understand what you want in a program itself. What is the specific questions and your objectives that you are looking at? Do you really want to just detect the presence of a vector? Do you want to monitor the population dynamics over time? Or do you want to have a broad overview of where to focus all your resources in terms of tackling the vector population? So these are some very key questions that you need to first ask before you can really design or put in place a program to understand the whole vector population itself. And of course, more importantly, the personnel is very critical itself. And which level of personnel will be involved in this surveillance program? Would it be, a central government kind of monitoring program that you're going to put up? Local authorities, municipal, and so on. And one thing to note is that you probably need trained personnel to be able to advise or perform identification of the mosquitoes. And I think that will be touched on a bit later on in the identification session. And how you can involve the community to be part of it, as I think we have echoed very often, is that there's not enough resources to go around in the population to assist in a lot of our programs. So how can we involve the community to be part of the surveillance program so that they can participate? And I know some countries have involved school children to be part of surveillance as well. So these are some of the things that countries can think of as well. and there's always insufficient resources to go around. So the cost available and the logistic that's needed will really shape the surveillance program and how extensive the program will be. And of course, more importantly is to really, have a collaboration, not just between public health, I would say, agencies, but with the scientific community as well, because synergistically, they could also partake in the surveillance as well as provide insights to the additional insights to analyzing data as well as providing further insights to health authorities as well. And of course, the vector that you're interested in will really define the traps that you'll be using. What's the behavior that you're looking at? And are you trying to understand the ecology of the vector of interest? Their breeding habitats can also play a role in the types of traps and the intensity that you want to deploy there. And I mean, what's key is that often to start a program, you need to understand a bit of the
Dr.
vector.
Chong, sorry, just to alert you, there's only 10 more minutes left.
No problem, yeah. So really you need to understand a bit of the vector of interest before you start a program. So I've listed here some, I would say, online information, web pages that you can really, search some of this information like PubMed, Google Scholar, and ResearchGate to find out a bit more of the vector of interest. For Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, there's really a lot of information, but of course for other vectors, that's where you need to find out a bit more to really understand, because the biology does differ between different countries, different terrain as well, and habitat. When it comes to the method, there's really a whole sweep of traps and so on. I mean, I've briefly only covered a few traps just to give you the key concepts, whether it's targeting the hole seeking, whether it's targeting the oviposition ones, or whether it's really some other passive method. So many traps, what to choose from and how to choose from. Essentially, you need to look at, what's the most cost effective. Some traps, while they can be really good, they are really too expensive. So the question is, are there alternatives that can provide you with some answers as well? What are the available resources that you have on hand, or could you collaborate with somebody to do the work? And what's the sensitivity to detect the varying level of vector population? Often, as some countries have mentioned, they're doing some small-scale study and so on. It's really to understand whether this particular trap is useful to your needs. For our case in Singapore, we use the gravity trap because that is something that is useful for our countries, and really it's because of our landscape is very different. We have limited space for deploying a huge trap, so that's why we adopted something that is of that particular size and so on. And the method itself is it for routine surveillance or is it for emergency response? Is different as well. And it's also tied to really some of the questions that you have, evaluating efficacy of control or looking at, risk itself. Is there a risk of transmission? And so which we will talk a bit more during the NS1 session later. And some of this you can read like public acceptance. So there are many traps out there again, as I mentioned. So what does the community accept? So that's very important. And one key thing to note is that often you may need to have more than one method to ensure that you fully capture the information in a particular location. One method by itself may have certain level of bias, and so you need to have more than one to ensure you can eliminate this biasness in sampling. So a few considerations over here as well. Location, where are you going to deploy? And I mean, if you have to prioritize, where would you prioritize? Is it area where there's some active transmission ongoing? Or is it areas where you would like to understand whether there's an issue? So this will have to be something for you to consider as well. Because if you know an area already have a problem, is there a need for you to know that there's a problem there? Or do you want to look out for somewhere else that that you are not certain of, especially when you have very tight resources. So some of the consideration as well. The size of the area, whether you are looking at the number of locations you're interested in. And I hear from during the country presentations for some of the Anopheles or malaria surveillance that people have talked about sentinel location. So these are things that you could also adopt for Aedes surveillance as well, to have fixed sentinel locations for longer term monitoring. I mean, a smaller scale monitoring to really understand the situation in the country. So to consider as well. And we briefly spoke about the pilot assessment, talk about the pilot trial, number of traps, frequency and duration. And using the trap density concept will allow you to kind of then expand it into a larger program. Again, I cannot stress enough about data management. It's important to have proper data records, record everything down, observation. And one thing to note is the missing data information. Do note that missing data is not the same as zero catch. Sometimes I know that people don't understand the difference between missing and zero catch. When you have no mosquito caught, you probably have very minimal risk. But when you have a missing trap, that means there's no data, no information. So you actually do not know what's the risk there. So these are things that you need to think of. You could also, and of course, you can integrate with geographic information system to know distribution. And ultimately, in any surveillance program, it never stops there. It's important to always review and evaluate whether the program is working, and if need to, you need to readjust and refine again. So that sums everything up, and I hope that gives you some understanding of some of the considerations for to set up a surveillance program. Thank you.